Welcome to the first digital map webinar related to the 2021 summer digital map workshop that was held. This is going to be ongoing over the course of this year and maybe even into next year, where we are going to try each time to deal with a topic that teachers are interested in, that they feel they need maybe some fine tuning on, or a new topic they want to explore that they haven't had time to explore. So that'll be kind of the gist of what we're doing. But the most important thing is, what do teachers who took the workshop, when they went back into the classroom and attempted to implement their assignment from the summer workshop, how did it work out? So we're fortunate tonight to have two teachers with us, Julia Rydberg, who teaches high school in New Richmond, Wisconsin, at the high school level, obviously, and she will be discussing how she modified 2 Geoinquiries. And then Rurik Johnson, who is a middle school teacher in science at Plymouth Middle School in Plymouth, Minnesota, put together a research project incorporating Survey 123, a web map, I believe, and he's got a couple other web apps that are really kind of neat that he added into it, where the images were brought in as a part of what he was doing and displaying after the kids did their project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. He said, as he's looking for his cursor. And I'm going to have Julia lead off here. And I'm going to give you about 15 minutes. And I'll give you kind of a warning when we're getting close to the end of the 15 minutes. And you may put your screen on, and welcome, Julia.
Thank you. So I can start by sharing. I'm going to just pull up the different documents I have for this. All right, so here is the Geoinquiry that I modified for my US history class. And it was actually the 3rd lesson of the school year where I ended up using this. Okay, so jumping right back in, but so this was the 3rd day of school, I believe, or maybe 4th, somewhere around there after like orientation, but like 3rd or 4th, like true content day. Actually 2nd, it says up here. So our goal, so I guess when I'm thinking about how I integrated this into our unit, I was thinking about, well, first I just explored that database of Geoinquiries. And it was really nicely organized. It goes in sequential order of most US history classes. So I found that really easy to navigate. And then from there, I immediately was attracted to the Native American lands Geoinquiry. And I know Wisconsin social studies standards are a little different than Minnesota. They're pretty broad. And it was actually a behavioral science standard that I connected it to. But it was analyzing, or the goal was to like look at how different cultures interact with their environments. So I immediately kind of saw that connection there. So what I did is I ended up making a copy of the Geoinquiry from the website. And as I went through it, as if I were a student, I had made myself a copy and I was editing it of like how I would communicate it with students. So one of the major changes I made is just with formatting, making sure that the headers were more bold and they stood out better, as well as numbered the step-by-step instructions. And I wanted it to be very user-friendly. I guess I was most cautious about my students with special services and their ability to work through step-by-step instructions. And then I did add like a single row table, just in case we ended up going online. I just know that keeps the text a little bit clearer. So I was just kind of like thinking at all different scenarios knowing that this is the beginning of the year and having not done this with any of my students before. So I went through that. And then the spot where I modified probably the most is this last portion on the evaluate. And that is where I had students try to answer our learning target to meet our standards specifically. So I didn't have to do a lot of change within the content, which was really nice. I really just had students utilize our inquiry skill of like developing a strong claim that's supported by evidence, and then connecting it to that content standard of cultures interacting with their environment. So that is pretty much the main portion of class. Knowing that my students hadn't had exposure to this, I think like last spring I had our tech person help me set up a Esri account, and that was like the first time he had heard of it as well. So I assumed that students maybe would struggle with this more than they did. But I was actually really impressed by how well students responded, especially I think my students with special services, the ones that I was like most worried about. I was so surprised by their ability to work through it independently, but also their willingness to explore. There are definitely the students who want to go step by step, but then there's the kids who you're like, where even are you on the map? But they're doing some of the best learning. And I loved to see that. So I really just modeled the first section, and then I had students go. One thing that we learned were on Chromebooks was that if students try to like scrub to zoom in like they would on like an iPhone, it will zoom in the part around the map, and then the map doesn't zoom in, which is what they're trying to focus on. So I was just telling all my students to use the plus and minus on the zoom functions, because that works best for us on a Chromebook without that like a handheld mouse, but the mouse pad. So that was pretty successful. And then I ended up making another one for my freshmen for our modern world history. And I ended up making one with the Berlin conference, and I think it's called Africa Borders and Boundaries. And my biggest takeaway, again, I saw similar things, but I think the thing that stood out to me the most is when it came to their summative, so many students wanted to write about that one day. And that was such an important takeaway, because I wasn't sure. I knew they're learning from like their responses, but I didn't know how impactful it was. So it was so cool to see, like, that was the thing that students took away, was that like visual analysis of how borders were drawn in a European perspective for their profit and their gain. And that was just such a beautiful takeaway for me, for students to get that perspective that is sometimes really hard and challenging to teach through text. So I loved that this activity invites all students in. You kind of eliminate that barrier of reading with primary and secondary sources in a history classroom, as well as that ability to explore. That is such a fun feeling. And Jim, like we were talking about at the beginning, you sometimes lose that engagement and excitement in high school, and it appears in different ways. But it was really fun to see kids excited to kind of get their hands on more applicable technology in class. So it was a lot of fun. I'll keep using them. And I'm going to experiment a little more in the future too as well. We're testing out survey 1, 2, 3 in our next upcoming unit. So we're continuing to embed it. We're seeing good results, and kids seem to love it too. So it's been great.
Just out of curiosity, having gone through it the first time, did you see anything that you thought you would change for the next time around?
A few things, like a student will always ask you a question and you're like, oh, that, like, once they ask it, you realize you could like format maybe the directions a little bit different. So I think the thing that, like, the number one question was like that light gray toolbar. Students had trouble finding that. So I think we even added like the light gray toolbar, or being a little bit more specific. But I think while it seemed a little tedious to like truly go through it, think like a student, make those edits as you go through, by doing that in advance, I would say most students, I mean, seem to be able to do what they needed. There's probably like one student, I think, all day that just really struggled getting started and needed kind of that like constant, like, okay, next step, next step. But I would say, you're just going to continue to revise. And I think you could also see an opportunity to use this in other classrooms too with different standards. They're super flexible. And I think also now having done it, this would be an amazing sub plan where you can be gone. And I can trust that my kids can do it on their own and actually learn at high levels without, having the sub have to really lead anything. So if anything, I think there are like little tweaks and changes, but the Geoinquiries are such a strong base of a lesson, that they really just open up more opportunities. Once you've done it, you can see like other connections, for really any unit or class. So.
And then I noted that on one of your comments that you included, that it's on the showcase page, that you felt kids got to higher level thinking skills quicker using the Geoinquiry. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think they're more so the ones doing the learning through the process. I think when they get to have their hand on the mouse and click to actually analyze that visual data, that is like, you can see those light bulb moments going off more frequently and with more students. Oftentimes in a history classroom, I feel like it's so reading intensive that students, kind of put up a wall of what they're going to expect, because that can be a challenge for them. And I feel like this not only invites all students in, but it empowers all students to analyze data, even if reading is a challenge.
I ran a, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, Julia, thank
Yeah.
you so much. Very impressive. I was wondering if anybody else here had a specific question before we switch gears and go to Rourke.
Charlie?
Sure. Julia, this is great to hear. Thank you for doing this and reporting about this. I'm intrigued, were these students exposed to the ArcGIS Online environment prior to the class?
No, and actually one of our biggest gaps at our high school right now is there's not a geography class in the high school. So there's 7th grade geography. They do a lot of mapping on paper, but they are not exposed to digital mapping, at least from what I know, at least that's happening right now, but no exposure to online mapping.
Cool. And so were these, did I hear right, are these 8th grade students?
This would be 10th grade, but I also tried it out
10th
with
grade.
9th grade as well. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. I'm intrigued with, did you walk them, did I hear this correctly, that you walked them through part 1, the ask zone, and then turn them loose?
Yeah, and I did. I said, I was like, if you get help, advocate for yourself, raise your hand. Our goal is to work through this. But I was like, do you feel ready? And they were excited and they're like, we're ready. Some classes were like, let's do one more. So we did one more. But I wanted them to feel confident that I was like, you can't mess it up. You can click, you can explore, but you want to make sure that if it tells you to turn something on or turn something off, that you're doing it, because it kind of all like accumulates. So, yeah, I guess I did a little bit different things for different classes. But yeah, I didn't go past the acquire with any class.
Julia, did you have them turn something in?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it on here, but when I printed it, I had our like thesis statement rubric that we used. So we did give them feedback on this last evaluate question. So they knew that they'd be answering this question for their summative with a different set of evidence. And then, so they had to make sure that they were using the evidence from the Geoinquiry to build a thesis statement. And then we gave them feedback on both of those components.
Nice. Good.
Yep, and made for quick grading too. I
That's
know
important.
we all are craving during this time.
Good.
All
I have
right.
lots more questions, but we'll talk about them later.